What's good, y'all? And welcome to another preseason preview video. In today's video, we're going over the Minnesota Timberwolves. In case this is your first preseason preview video of mine that you're seeing, basically what I do is recap the whole offseason, go through all the moves each team made, and then look into the future and try to predict what we can expect from this team. Before we get into it, I do want to leave a reminder here to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you already haven't, as well as after this video, make sure you look in the description. There's a link to a playlist that'll show all the teams I've covered already. Make sure you check those out. And without further ado, let's talk about the additions the Timberwolves made this offseason. The Timberwolves were pretty limited in cap space, but that didn't stop them from trying to improve their roster. They traded up to the 8th overall pick to draft Rob Dillingham out of Kentucky, as well as signing Joe Ingles from free agency. I want to start by talking about Rob Dillingham because I really like that move for the Timberwolves. Like I mentioned, they were kind of strapped with what they could really do. They don't have much draft assets after trading for Rudy Gobert. They don't have much cap space after paying Rudy and Cat, and Mike Conley just got an extension, Anthony Edwards getting his extension. They have a lot of guys that they're paying right now. So they didn't really have much wiggle room heading into this offseason to improve their roster, but they still found a way to do it. They traded up with the Spurs. They traded away 2 future picks in order to get Rob Dillingham here. And I like the pick a lot because as it works out right now, he'll be their backup point guard, which is a spot that they really needed to fill. You know, in college, he was coming off the bench at Kentucky, so it kind of works out. He should be used to that role a little bit at least. He'll be able to come on to the court, you know, just be him, you know, be a great offensive point guard where he can score his own buckets, whether that's getting to the rim or creating a shot on the perimeter. But then also he's shown flashes of being a very good to solid playmaker, so I'm excited to see that. But also I like the move for the future because Rob Dillingham has pretty high potential if you ask me, and Mike Conley is getting older. I know they just signed him for an extension, but eventually he's going to retire or they're going to trade him or whatever happens. He's not going to be the point guard forever. But I really like the idea of Rob coming into the NBA and kind of just getting accustomed to it while being a bench role, and then he can step up and be elevated to the starter when he is ready. Then I also like the signing of Joe Ingles. I know he's getting up there in age at this point, but I like his fit for this team. I don't expect him to do anything crazy, but he can shoot threes, which last season the Timberwolves didn't really have too many volume guys doing that. So I like the fact that he can come onto the court and just space the floor and shoot a bunch of shots. And then also with Kyle Anderson not being on the team anymore, they kind of used Kyle as like a point forward at times and allowed him to use his playmaking abilities, you know, while being the power forward on the court. I think Joe Ingles can do that too. He's a pretty good passer at that forward position, so I like the fit for Minnesota. You can't bring in guys without letting some go though, so let's take a look at the losses the Timberwolves had this offseason. I mentioned before Kyle Anderson will not be on the team. He signed a new deal with the Golden State Warriors, and then Jordan McLaughlin also signed a new contract. He will be playing for the Kings next season. No disrespect to these guys, but if my favorite team's biggest losses were Kyle Anderson and Jordan McLaughlin, I'm feeling very happy about the offseason. I do think the Wolves will miss Kyle at least a little bit. At the same time, though, they already have a loaded front court with Cat, with Rudy, with Naz Reid. Now Joe Ingles you throw into that mix as well. And then also last season, Kyle had a little bit of a down year. Shooting the ball, he was very, very bad. Defensively, he hasn't ever been, you know, a really great defender, and when he's getting an age, it hasn't gotten any better. I mentioned before his playmaking, and I do really value that for this team especially, and in the playoffs, he did have a few games for them that were really solid. All around, though, I wouldn't be really bugging about missing out on him. And then for Jordan McLaughlin, I know he's a little bit of a fan favorite out there in Minnesota, but you know, he played a bunch of games in the beginning of the season, then they went out and got Monte Morris, and he kind of missed out on his minutes. At the same time, though, neither him or Monte are on the team anymore. They replaced that backup point guard role with Rob Dillingham, so again, not much of a loss for Minnesota. And now that we recap the moves that the Timberwolves made this offseason, let's take a look at a potential rotation we could be seeing. There's a lot of continuity out here in the Twin Cities. As you see, the starting lineup is staying the same as last year. You got Mike Conley, Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Karl Anthony Towns, and Rudy Gobert. And then the bench is largely the same as well, with a few new additions, including Rob Dillingham, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, Joe Ingles, and Naz Reid. Now, I said this in my last year's preseason preview for the Timberwolves, and I'm going to say it again. This team is built for the regular season. On paper, this team looks absolutely incredible, and I have no doubt in my mind that they will dominate again to a top 3 seed out west. They're coming off a Western Conference Finals run where on that run they knocked off the defending champion Denver Nuggets. They swept the Phoenix Suns. Once they got to Dallas, things got a little shaky, but my point is they're coming off a very successful season, and I think they need to kind of gear more towards that on how they can be even better come this playoffs. I've mentioned a few times now in this video that they were pretty strapped when it comes to moves they can make, and they're going to be strapped for the foreseeable future. So in order for them to level up as a team, they're going to really rely on Anthony Edwards and his growth as a player. He's coming off of a Olympics run where he looked very aggressive, where he was on the court with some all-time greats, a bunch of Hall of Famers, and at times he looked like the best scorer and one of the best players out there, which is saying something for the young guy. And he's improved pretty much every season he's been in the NBA. First, it was his defense jumping up. Last season, he added his mid-range game. He came into the league being a great finisher and great at getting to the rim. Where I really think he needs to improve, like these next steps, would be his three-point shooting. You know, like I said, he got the mid-range game down. If he can expand that range a little bit more and become more of a three-point shooter, it would be damn near impossible to guard him. And then also his playmaking. I think this playmaking is probably more important than the three-point shooting, because we saw last year in the playoffs, like I said, once they got to Dallas, things got a little bit shaky, and we saw Anthony Edwards, they would send the double, and he would just have some passes that just got away from him. You know, he is a great scorer. Obviously, Dallas wants to get the ball out of his hands, so he needs to be better at reading the defense, seeing where the double's coming from, knowing where the open man is, and then making an accurate pass. And I gotta be honest, if he adds the passing game and gets that a little bit better, or even the three-point shooting, one of the two, he will be probably a top 5, top 10 player in the NBA. You know, he's that good. He just needs that little extra bit to really push him over the edge. And while we're talking about playoffs and wanting to improve, you need to bring up their front court of Cat and Rudy Gobert. Starting off with Cat, what I really want to see from Cat this next playoffs is consistency. We saw last year in the playoffs, he would have one game where he looked great, maybe the best player on the Timberwolves. Then the next game, he would be in foul trouble and have, 3 fouls and 6 minutes of playing time. Like, you need that happy medium at least. You can't have this, such a great discrepancy between your best game, your worst game, your best game, your worst game. You just gotta have to find that happy medium where instead of being here and here, maybe you lower your ceiling a little bit but raise that floor, and now you're between here and here. And then Rudy Gobert, I know he is probably the absolute most polarizing player in the NBA. Some people love him and see the impact that he brings to the court. Some people hate him and think he is the worst player to ever be in the NBA. I definitely gear more towards this side of not loving Rudy, but I definitely see the value he brings to the court. I personally think that Rudy had a good playoff run last season. Against Phoenix, he looked great. Against Denver, he looked great. Again, once he came to Dallas, the whole Minnesota team looked a little shaky. But all around, in that Phoenix series, he had possessions where he was guarding KD on the perimeter, and he was holding up. He was obviously protecting the rim and rebounding throughout the whole playoffs. In Denver, he had some matchups and some nights where he was guarding Jokic one-on-one. Then there was other nights where he was more of a roamer. They put Cat on Jokic, and he was able to just kind of help and stay by the rim. He did great at that. All around, I really like the playoffs from Rudy, defensively, rebounding, all of that. Offensively, more specifically in the short roll, that's where Rudy needs to improve. And I mean, at this point, I don't know if we'll ever see that improvement from Rudy, but if he can just be more comfortable in that short roll, he would look like a completely different player. Teams and defenses wouldn't be able to play off of him as easily as they do now if he was able to just take that one dribble and finish at the rim, or once he gets there, make a quick pass to the corner or to a cutter. When he's in that short roll, he looks very uncomfortable with the basketball in his hands. Pretty much if he had the basketball in his hands anywhere besides like 3 feet away from the rim, he looks uncomfortable. So if he's able to work on that just a little bit, the team would look absolutely like a completely different team. Like I said, I think this team is going to be great in the regular season. I think they're going to be able to have a top seed pretty easily. It's more that playoffs where I think their holes in the roster will kind of seep through a little bit more. I mean, that's everyone though. In the playoffs, things get a little bit more difficult. I'm just hoping we see some slight improvements from these guys in these areas. And now that we have an idea of what this team is going to look like, let's take a look at their biggest strength. This should come as no surprise to anyone, but defensively, this team is very, very elite. Here I have listed their leaders in stocks from last season. In case you guys don't know, stocks are steals per game plus blocks per game. And then I have the players' heights listed so you can see the great size they have. Besides their two small point guards of Mike Conley and Rob Dillingham, they have great positional size across the board. Of course, they have their two 7-footers of Cat and Rudy. Then they also have Jaden McDaniels, who's 6'9" at the small forward spot. Off their bench, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is 6'5" at that wing spot. Anthony Edwards is also 6'5". Then they also got two 6'9" guys and Naz Reid and Joe Ingles off their bench. They have so much size across the board, and obviously size is a big proponent of defense. But then when you look at their personnel even closer, I mean, it's very obvious that their defense is going to be elite. Of course, you have Rudy Gobert down low, protecting the rim, and regardless of what you think about him in the playoffs or as a player, it's objectively true that when Rudy Gobert is on the court in the regular season, you're going to have a top 10 defense. I'm pretty sure his entire career, he's been a part of top 10 defenses. He just erases shots at the rim. There's players that will get there, he'll be there ready to block, and they're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm not going to try that. I'll kick this one out. I'll dribble back out to the perimeter because there's no point. I know Rudy will block it. But what makes the Timberwolves even better than a lot of the past teams we've seen with Rudy on them is they have actual great perimeter defenders. Jaden McDaniels is one of the most versatile defenders in the NBA. I mentioned before his 6'9" frame. He's also got super long arms, the foot speed, the defensive instincts. He will just lock onto your best player and make their life hell. Then beyond that, they have Anthony Edwards, who's one of the best two-way superstars in the NBA right now. Nickeil Alexander-Walker will fly around getting into passing lanes coming off their bench. Their personnel is literally perfect. Last season, they were the #1 defense when you look at defensive rating. I have no doubt in my mind they will be top 5 again. There are some teams that I think will give them a run for their money, like the Thunder or the Celtics or the Knicks maybe even. But I have, again, no doubt in my mind they will definitely be top 5. Of course, as you guys know though, no team is perfect, so let's take a look at their biggest weakness. Here you can see the Timberwolves leaders of assists per game from last season. They only have 4 players that averaged over 3 assists per game last year, and that's including Rob Dillingham, who did it in college. Now, I don't think that this is a crazy big weakness that the Timberwolves have. Like I said, on paper, they look very, very solid, very, very good. But this is just the biggest weakness that I see on their roster. And I do want to start off by saying I think Mike Conley is a good playmaker. I think he's super solid to have at that point guard spot, playmaking-wise. Whether that's him just setting up sets or running a pick and roll or just being a part of that swing, next guy, get to the open man type of thing. I think he can do that very well. And then I do think that Rob Dillingham will be a solid playmaker for them off the bench, but I don't want to really make it so he needs to be a good playmaker for them, because I feel like that's just a lot of pressure to put onto a rookie, especially when you have high aspirations of being an NBA champion level team. To put so much reliance in a rookie could come and bite you in the butt. I think the best way to fix this issue though is to, like I mentioned before, have Anthony Edwards kind of improve a little bit playmaking wise. I know he was second on the graph right there, but I feel like that's more of a product of him just having the ball a bunch as their main #1 option. Same thing with Cat. I know Cat was up there. I think both of these guys are, they have definitely a lot of room to improve when it comes to the playmaking aspects of their game. Both of them just have some really dumb turnovers at times, just where they're throwing the ball away. I mentioned a few of the times in the Mavericks series where Ant just kind of threw it out to the crowd. There'll be some times where Cat will just try to do a little bit too much, and he'll be driving to the basket and then lose the ball out of his hands or try to make the pass, but it's just the lane is not there, the opening is not there. Both of these guys, I think if they just elevate themselves a little bit, it can kind of alleviate this problem. But as of right now, I see it as an issue, and I think it could lead to some stagnant offense. Again, I think this is going to be really more shown in the playoffs, where teams really hone in to try to get every little advantage over each other as they can. And that's when we'll see them play off of Cat or play off of Ant or double them make the right read like that. And I guess we won't see if they really fix it until that time comes. And now it is time for the ceiling, the floor, and my expectations for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Starting off with their ceiling, I see them being a number 1 seed out west at their absolute best. Last season, they ended as the 3rd seed, and it was a really tight race between the Thunder, the Nuggets, and the Timberwolves for that number 1 seed. They ended up falling down into the 3rd, but I could definitely see a world where they will be the number 1 seed. I've been saying throughout this whole video that they are built to be a great regular season team, and I do think they will do that. When it comes to the playoffs, I can see them also repeating their playoff success and having a deep run. At their absolute best, I think they could make the NBA Finals, and depending on matchups, they could win it too. Defense, you know, it's the saying, defense wins championships. They're going to have a great defense again. It's more about, can Anthony Edwards carry them offensively to the promised land? And at their ceiling, I could see it happening. When you talk about their floor, I could see them being as low as the 5th seed. You know, there's teams out there, like I said, OKC, Denver, even the Mavericks and the Grizzlies, I can see in a world being better than the Timberwolves. Obviously, this is looking at them at the absolute worst. And then when you talk about being a 6th seed out west in the playoffs, you're going to have a very, very difficult first round matchup. They could always win it, but at their floor, I would see them being like a competitive first round exit. Then when you talk about my expectations for the Timberwolves, I'm going to slot them in at the 2 seed, just below the OKC Thunder. I'm extremely high on the Thunder. I think they're going to have a great regular season, and I think the Timberwolves are going to be right behind them. And then I do think they will have a pretty deep playoff run again like last season. I think they could make the Western Conference Finals again. It would be a pretty rough matchup, though, because they would have to go through the OKC Thunder, maybe the Mavericks again. You know, some of those matchups could be pretty difficult to deal with. So I do think they will be very competitive in the conference finals, but not make the finals. What do you guys think, though? Where do you think the Timberwolves are going to end in this year's standings? Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure you leave it a like, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. In the description, there's links to all my social medias, so make sure you follow me on all those to keep up to date with me. Catch y'all.